The massive space station orbited slowly above the blue-green world below. Inside the grand meeting hall, two very different groups sat across from each other at a long metal table. The air felt thick with tension. Ambassador Kyung-min smoothed down his bright purple ceremonial robes one last time. His insect-like face showed no emotion, but inside he felt annoyed. These humans had become far too bold for his liking. Only 100 years ago, they were still fighting with primitive weapons on their single planet. Now they dared to argue with the mighty Galactic Trade Confederation. The human woman sitting across from him looked completely calm. Captain Ji-woo had short black hair and wore a simple grey uniform. Her dark eyes stared directly at him without blinking. She showed no fear at all, which bothered Kyung-min more than he wanted to admit. "Let me make this very clear," Kyung-min said in his buzzing voice. "The Confederation has been generous with your species. We allowed you to join Galactic Trade. We shared basic technology with you. Now we ask for a simple payment in return." Captain Ji-woo leaned back in her chair. "You call taking 70% of all rare earth metals we mine a simple payment? That's not trade. That's robbery." Behind Kyung-min, Admiral Hai-jin made a sound like grinding metal. The tall, gray-skinned alien had commanded Confederation fleets for over 2 centuries. His forearms crossed over his chest as he looked down at the humans with disgust. "Your species mines these metals from dead rocks in space," Admiral Hai-jin said coldly. "Without our protection, pirates would take everything anyway. We offer you safety and stability. The price is fair." "Fair?" Captain Ji-woo laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want us to give you most of our most valuable resources. In return, you promise not to attack us yourself. How is that different from what pirates would do?" Kyung-min's mandibles clicked together rapidly. This was a sign of anger in his species, though the humans probably didn't know that. "You forget your place, Captain. Humanity is new to the galaxy. You have no powerful allies. Your technology is primitive. Your ships are slow and weak. You need the Confederation more than we need you." The other humans at the table shifted uncomfortably. There was Young Soo, the trade minister, who kept looking at his tablet nervously. Next to him sat Commander Jae-min, a military officer whose hand rested near his weapon. At the end of the table, old Dr. Hai-jin took notes quietly, her wrinkled face showing deep concern. Captain Ji-woo stood up slowly. She was not tall, but something about her presence made the room feel smaller. "Ambassador, you seem to think we're desperate. You believe we'll accept any deal rather than fight." "Because you will," Admiral Hai-jin interrupted. "Your species is famous for fighting each other. You can't even unite your own planet properly. How could you possibly stand against the greatest military force in the galaxy?" "You're right about one thing," Ji-woo said quietly. "Humans do fight. We've been fighting for thousands of years. We've had wars that killed millions. We've built weapons that could destroy entire continents. But you know what we learned from all that fighting?" The aliens waited, but she didn't continue right away. Instead, she walked to the large window that showed the stars beyond. Her reflection looked small against the vast darkness of space. "We learned that humans fight hardest when someone tries to control us. Every time in our history that someone tried to force us into slavery or make us give up our freedom, we fought back. Sometimes we lost at first. Sometimes it took years or decades. But in the end, we always won." Kyung-min felt a strange chill run through his body. Something in the human's voice had changed. It was still calm, still controlled, but now there was something else underneath, something that reminded him of the predators on his home world. "Your terms are completely unacceptable," Captain Ji-woo said, turning back to face them. "We will not give you 70% of our mining output. We will not accept your protection. We will not bow down to threats." The ambassador's mandibles clicked even faster now. "Then you leave us absolutely no choice in this matter. Effective immediately, all human space is under complete economic blockade. Your ships will not be allowed to pass through any Confederation space. Your colonies will receive no supplies from Confederation worlds. Your people will get no help from any member species." Admiral Hai-jin nodded with satisfaction. "We have over 10,000 warships. You have what? A few hundred patrol boats? Your colonies depend on trade to survive. Cut off from the galaxy, you'll starve within months." Captain Ji-woo looked at each of her team members. Young Soo looked terrified. Commander Jae-min looked angry. Dr. Hye-jin just looked sad. But when Ji-woo looked back at the aliens, her expression hadn't changed at all. "You're making a serious mistake," she said simply. "The only mistake," Admiral Hae-jin said with a sound like laughter, "would be showing any weakness to upstart species like yours. Mark my words, human. You'll come crawling back within a month, begging us to accept your surrender." As the human delegation stood to leave, Kyung-min felt completely satisfied with how things had gone. These emotional, divided creatures would surely crumble quickly under economic pressure. Their colonies would panic when supplies stopped arriving. Their governments would blame each other for the crisis. Within weeks, maybe days, they would be desperate enough to accept even worse terms than what he had originally offered. He watched through the window as the small human shuttle departed the station. Such a tiny, fragile-looking ship. It seemed impossible that such primitive beings could pose any real threat to the mighty Confederation. If only he had known what was about to happen next. Commander Tae-hyun stared at the massive screen showing human space from his flagship's bridge. 2 weeks had passed since the blockade began, and something felt very wrong. The tall, blue-skinned alien had expected to see signs of panic by now. Desperate messages between human colonies, ships trying to break through the blockade. Maybe even some colonies surrendering already. Instead, there was a strange quiet that made his skin crawl. "Commander," called out his communications officer from across the bridge. The young alien's voice sounded confused. "I'm picking up some very odd signals from human space." Tae-hyun walked over to the communications station. Banks of screens showed wave patterns and data streams that his officer had been monitoring for days. "What kind of signals, Dong-ho?" "That's just it, sir. They're not the kind of messages we expected at all. No panic, no desperate calls for help. Instead, the humans seem to be organizing." This made no sense to Tae-hyun. Every species the Confederation had blockaded before had fallen apart within days. Fear would spread. Different colonies would blame each other. Governments would collapse. As people demanded action, it was always the same pattern. "Show me," he ordered. The main screen lit up with intercepted human communications. Most of it was in code, but their translation computers had broken some of it. What Tae-hyun saw made his blood run cold. Industrial Conversion Protocol 7 is now active across all sectors. Civilian production lines have been successfully retooled. Estimated completion in 72 hours. All non-essential personnel to report to designated military training facilities immediately. Tae-hyun felt his hands shake slightly. "How many colonies are sending these kinds of messages?" "All of them, sir," Dong-ho replied quietly. "Every single human settlement is coordinating with every other settlement. It's like they planned for this exact situation." Across the bridge, Lieutenant Soo-jin looked up from her intelligence station. She was the fleet's expert on reading enemy movements and intentions. Her 4 eyes could process data faster than most computers. Right now, all 4 eyes looked worried. "Commander," she called out, "we're detecting massive industrial shifts across all human space. Civilian manufacturing has stopped almost completely." "Excellent," Tae-hyun said, feeling some relief. "Starvation will bring them to surrender much faster than we expected." But Soo-jin shook her head, her long tentacles writhing with anxiety. "Sir, I don't think they're starving. The energy readings from their industrial centers are actually increasing, not decreasing. They're not shutting down their factories. They're changing what those factories make." "What do you mean changing?" "Every civilian factory, every orbital manufacturing platform, every mining station, they've all switched to military production. Food processing plants are now making military rations. Clothing factories are producing uniforms. Electronics manufacturers are building communication equipment and weapons." The bridge fell silent except for the humming of the ship's engines. Tae-hyun had never seen anything like this before. When the Confederation blockaded a species, they usually focused on protecting their most important worlds while sacrificing the outer colonies. Internal fighting always broke out as different groups competed for limited resources. But the humans were doing something completely different. Instead of falling apart, they seemed to be coming together stronger than ever. Meanwhile, on Earth, something unprecedented was happening in the Capitol building. President Min-ho stood before the largest gathering of human leaders in history. The elderly woman looked small behind the massive podium, but her voice carried, clearly to every person in the room, and to every human world across the galaxy. Representatives from every nation, every colony, every space station sat together in the same room. These were people who had been arguing with each other for decades about trade disputes, territorial rights, and political differences. Now they all listened in complete silence. "My fellow humans," President Minho began, her voice steady despite her age, "for the first time in our species' history, we face an enemy that threatens not just one nation or one world, but all of humanity." The cameras broadcasting her speech showed faces from every human settlement. Miners on asteroid stations, farmers on agricultural worlds, scientists on research platforms, soldiers on military bases, all of them watching, all of them waiting. The Galactic Trade Confederation believes we are weak because we are young. They think we will collapse because we sometimes disagree with each other. They expect us to surrender because other species have surrendered before us. She paused, looking directly into the camera. They have made a serious error in judgment. Yes, humans sometimes fight among ourselves. Yes, we have disagreements about how to live and how to govern ourselves. But there is one thing that has always united humanity throughout our entire history. The president's voice grew stronger, carrying an edge that made people sit up straighter. We will never accept slavery. We will never bow down to bullies. And we will never surrender our freedom to anyone, no matter how powerful they think they are. She took a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her words would be remembered for generations. They think we're weak because we're young. They forget that young species fight hardest when someone tries to control them. They forget that humans have been fighting for survival since we first walked upright on Earth. Today, we activate Protocol Zero. Across human space, something extraordinary began to happen. Military commanders who had studied humanity's bloodiest wars pulled out plans that had been written in humanity's darkest hours, strategies developed during world wars, tactics learned from resistance movements, knowledge gained from every conflict humanity had ever fought. Within hours, every human settlement began to disappear from long-range sensors, not destroyed, just invisible. Ships that had been broadcasting their positions suddenly went silent. Colonies that had been easily detectable vanished, as if they had never existed. Back on his flagship, Commander Tae-hyun watched his screens in growing horror as humanity simply faded away. "Sir," Lieutenant Sujin whispered, "where did they all go?" For the first time in his long military career, Tae-hyun had no answer. Admiral Hae-jin was reviewing supply reports in his private quarters when the emergency alarm started blaring. The sound cut through the quiet hum of his flagship like a knife. His forearms moved quickly as he pulled up the communication channel. "What's happening?" he demanded into his headset. "Admiral, we've lost contact with Supply Convoy 7, came the panicked voice of his communications officer. "They were supposed to check in 30 minutes ago. Complete radio silence." Hae-jin felt his stomach drop. Supply Convoy 7 consisted of 6 massive cargo ships carrying food, ammunition, and spare parts for the blockade fleet. Each ship was the size of a small city, heavily armored and protected by 2 destroyer escorts. They had been traveling through what should have been completely safe space, far from any human settlements. "Send a search team immediately," he ordered. 3 hours later, the search team returned with news that chilled everyone who heard it. They had found absolutely nothing. No wreckage, no debris, no escape pods, no distress beacons. 8 enormous ships had simply vanished, as if they had never existed at all. Over the next few days, Admiral Hae-jin tried to convince himself it was just a freak accident. Maybe the convoy had suffered some kind of catastrophic engine failure that destroyed everything completely. These things happened sometimes in space, even if they were incredibly rare. Then Supply Convoy 12 disappeared, then Convoy 15. By the end of the week, Admiral Hae-jin stood in his command center, staring at a holographic map of the sector. Red dots marked the locations where his ships had vanished. 17 convoys in 7 days. Each one carrying vital supplies for the blockade fleet. "How many ships have we lost total?" he asked Commander Tae-hyun, who looked like he hadn't slept in days. Tae-hyun's voice was tight with stress. 17 convoys, sir. That's over 100 ships total, including escorts. We don't even know what's hitting them. No survivors, no witnesses, no evidence of any kind. That's impossible, Admiral Hai-Jin said, but even as he spoke the words, he didn't believe them. No enemy force could destroy our ships so completely without leaving any trace. Sir, interrupted Lieutenant Su-Jin from her intelligence station, I've been analyzing the attack patterns. The convoys that disappeared were all taking different routes through different sectors, but they all had one thing in common. What? They were all traveling through areas with heavy asteroid fields, or near old mining sites. Admiral Hai-Jin studied the holographic map more carefully. She was right. Every red dot marking a lost convoy was positioned near some kind of space debris or abandoned mining operation. You think someone is hiding in the asteroids? It's the only explanation that makes sense, sir. But if that's true, then humans have been preparing for this war much longer than we thought. The answer to their mystery came 3 days later at the Battle of Kepler Station. The station was a small Confederation outpost that monitored shipping lanes in the outer rim. It should have been perfectly safe, protected by a squadron of destroyers and far from any known human activity. Captain Dong-Wu was commanding the station's defense fleet when his sensors picked up movement in the nearby asteroid field. At first, he thought it might be another missing convoy, somehow finding its way home. Then the asteroid started shooting back. What emerged from the rocky debris looked like nothing Captain Dong-Wu had ever seen before. These weren't proper warships built in military shipyards. They were Frankenstein monsters, made from whatever materials the humans could find. Mining equipment welded to cargo ship hulls, construction vehicles covered in armor plating, civilian freighters bristling with makeshift weapons. They looked crude and ugly and completely ridiculous. They also moved with the precision of a military formation that had been drilling together for months. All ships attack formation, Captain Dong-Wu ordered. His destroyers were sleek modern vessels with the latest weapons and shields. They should have been able to crush these primitive human ships easily. The battle that followed would be remembered as the moment everything changed. The human ships didn't fight like any military force the Confederation had ever encountered. They didn't try to protect themselves. They didn't retreat when damaged. They didn't follow any of the standard rules of space combat. Instead, they fought like cornered animals with nothing left to lose. Captain Dong-Wu watched in absolute horror as a human freighter, its hull already breached and atmosphere venting into space, turned directly toward his destroyer at full speed. The ship was clearly dying, its engines overloading and its structure failing. "They're going to ram us," his weapons officer shouted. "Evasive maneuvers," Dong-Wu ordered, but it was too late. The human ship struck his destroyer with the force of a small asteroid. The impact tore both vessels apart in a brilliant explosion that lit up the darkness of space. As Captain Dong-Wu's escape pod ejected automatically, he could see through the small window that the human ship's crew had never even tried to escape. "They're completely insane," he whispered to himself. "They're actually ramming us with their own people still inside." But the humans weren't insane. They were doing something much more terrifying than that. They were winning. General Yu-Jin watched the battle from her mobile command center, a massive ship that stayed far from the fighting while coordinating Confederation forces. She had commanded fleets for over 30 years. She had fought against pirates, rebels, and hostile alien species. She had seen every type of space combat imaginable, but she had never seen anything like this. The human ships kept coming no matter how many were destroyed. When their weapons were damaged, they rammed enemy vessels. When their engines failed, they used their momentum to crash into Confederation positions. When they were outnumbered, they split up and attacked from multiple directions at once. It wasn't just their tactics that frightened her. It was their attitude. Every other species the Confederation had fought had tried to preserve their ships and save their crews. They retreated when losing. They surrendered when the situation became hopeless. The humans did none of these things. They fought like they had already accepted that they were going to die, and the only question was how much damage they could do before that happened. "General," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving reports from all across the sector. Human ships are attacking our supply lines, our outposts, our patrol routes. They're everywhere." General Yujin stared at the tactical display showing dozens of red dots representing human attacks. In just a few hours, the humans had gone from invisible to omnipresent. They were striking at targets the Confederation didn't even know were vulnerable. "How many of them are there?" she asked quietly. "We don't know, General. But based on these attack patterns, they've been preparing for this war for much longer than anyone realized." As she watched her fleet's positions crumble one by one, General Yujin felt ice in her veins. In 30 years of warfare, she had never encountered an enemy like this. The humans fought with a desperation and determination that she had only read about in history books. They fought like they had nothing left to lose, because they didn't. The battle for New Geneva was supposed to be easy. General Yujin had positioned her entire Fifth Fleet above the human colony world, ready to demonstrate the price of rebellion. New Geneva was one of humanity's newer settlements, home to about 2 million people who grew food for other human colonies. It had no military installations, no defensive platforms, and no way to fight back against a full orbital bombardment. Tapetatais. Least that's what the Confederation believed. Colonel Seok-jin crouched in the underground command bunker beneath New Geneva's capital city. The human officer was young for his rank, but his eyes held the kind of hardness that came from months of desperate fighting. Around him, dozens of technicians worked at computer stations, coordinating what would become known as the most brilliant military operation in human history. "General Yujin's fleet is in position," reported his intelligence officer. 43 heavy cruisers, 12 destroyers and her flagship. They're preparing to start the bombardment in 1 hour. "Perfect," Colonel Seok-jin said quietly. "Signal all units. Operation Hammerfall begins now." Above the planet, General Yujin stood on the bridge of her flagship, watching the peaceful blue world below. She felt no pleasure in what she was about to do. But the humans had to be taught a lesson. Their impossible victories against Confederation supply convoys had shocked the entire galaxy. It was time to remind everyone that the Confederation still held the real power. "Begin bombardment of military targets," she ordered. "General," her weapons officer looked confused, "our scans show no military targets on the surface, just cities and farms." "Then target the cities, make it quick and clean. We're not monsters, but they need to understand the consequences of defying us." The first energy beams lanced down from the Confederation fleet toward New Geneva's surface. They should have struck the planet's major cities, killing thousands and breaking human resistance once and for all. Instead, the beams hit nothing but empty air. "What happened?" General Yujin demanded. "Why did we miss?" "We didn't miss, General," her sensor officer replied, his voice shaking. "The cities, they're not there anymore." "What do you mean they're not there?" "I mean the cities have moved underground. All of them. Every building, every person, every piece of infrastructure. It's like they built a second planet beneath the first one." General Yujin stared at the sensor readings in disbelief. In the months since the blockade began, the humans hadn't just been preparing for war. They had been rebuilding their entire civilization underground, creating vast tunnel networks and underground cities that could house millions of people. But that was only the beginning of the surprises waiting for the Confederation fleet. "General," called out her communications officer, "we're detecting massive movement in the asteroid belt. Something's coming toward us." "Asteroids don't move on their own," General Yujin said. "What's pushing them?" The answer became clear as the first rocks struck her fleet. These weren't random space debris. They were carefully aimed projectiles, each one guided by human-built engines and traveling at incredible speeds. The humans had turned their entire asteroid mining operation into the largest artillery system ever created. Rocks the size of buildings slammed into Confederation ships with the force of nuclear weapons. The impact sent massive vessels spinning. Out of control, their hulls cracked open like eggs. What made it worse was the precision. The humans weren't just throwing rocks randomly, they were targeting specific ships, specific sections with surgical accuracy. "They've weaponized their mining equipment," General Yujin whispered as another cruiser exploded under asteroid impact. "Every mining ship, every construction platform, it's all part of one giant weapon system." Colonel Seok-jin watched the battle from his underground command center with grim satisfaction. Human engineers had spent months preparing for this moment. They had attached engines to thousands of asteroids, creating a fleet of kinetic weapons that could strike targets across the entire star system. Each rock was guided by mining equipment that had been converted into targeting systems. "Target their flagship next," he ordered calmly. But the real surprise came when the Confederation tried to retreat. As General Yu Jin's damaged fleet attempted to escape the asteroid bombardment, they found their path blocked by ships that shouldn't have existed. Captain So Young led a fleet of human vessels that emerged from deep space like ghosts. Her ships were the strangest things the galaxy had ever seen. Combinations of mining equipment, construction vehicles, and civilian transports all welded together into functional warships. They looked like they had been built in someone's backyard, which in many cases they had been. "This is Captain So Young of the Human Liberation Fleet," her voice broadcast across all frequencies. "Confederation vessels, you are surrounded. Surrender now and you will be treated according to the laws of war." General Yu Jin laughed bitterly. "Liberation Fleet? You're barely more than pirates with mining equipment." "Perhaps," Captain So Young replied. "But we're pirates who just destroyed your orbital bombardment force with rocks and spare parts. I'd suggest you consider your position carefully." As the battle around New Geneva raged, something even more significant was happening across the galaxy. Captain So Young's message wasn't just aimed at the Confederation fleet. It was being broadcast to every star system in known space, including the worlds where other species lived under Confederation rule. "This message goes out to all species held in bondage by the Galactic Trade Confederation," Captain So Young announced. "The Keth mining slaves of Rigel 7, the Voss agricultural workers of the Centauri colonies, the Zahn factory laborers of the industrial worlds. You are no longer alone." On a dozen different worlds, enslaved alien species looked up at the stars and heard something they had never expected to hear. A promise of freedom from creatures they had never even met. "Any species willing to stand up for their own freedom is now under human protection. We didn't start this war to conquer anyone. We started it because someone tried to make us slaves. Now we're here to make sure no one has to be a slave ever again." The effect was immediate and devastating for the Confederation. Across their territory, slave uprisings began on world after world. Species that had been oppressed for centuries suddenly found the courage to fight back, knowing that the strange humans who had humiliated the galaxy's greatest military would come to help them. General Yu Jin watched her tactical display fill with red warning signals as rebellions erupted across Confederation space. Each red dot represented another world in revolt, another piece of the Confederation's power structure crumbling. "How is this possible?" she asked no one in particular. "How are they coordinating uprisings across hundreds of light years?" The answer was simple, though the Confederation didn't understand it yet. Humans had spent their blockaded months doing more than just preparing for war. They had been secretly contacting every oppressed species in the galaxy, sharing technology, providing encouragement, and building the largest resistance network in galactic history. As Captain So Young's ragtag fleet scattered the remnants of General Yu Jin's once mighty armada, the message was clear to everyone watching. Humanity wasn't just fighting for their own freedom, they were fighting for everyone's freedom, and they were winning. Admiral Hai Jin stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking out at the human ships that surrounded him. His once mighty vessel was crippled, its engines dead and its weapons offline. Emergency lights flickered in the darkness, casting strange shadows across his four arms as he gripped the command rail. Around his ship, dozens of human vessels floated in perfect formation. They were still the same ugly, jury-rigged machines built from mining equipment and civilian parts. But now, Admiral Hai Jin understood what he hadn't seen before. These crude-looking ships had just defeated the most powerful military force in the galaxy. His communications officer, barely able to work at his damaged station, looked up with fear in his eyes. "Admiral, we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet." "Put it through," Hai Jin said quietly. He expected to hear demands for his surrender, maybe threats about what would happen to him and his crew. In his long military career, he had seen how victorious enemies usually behaved. Instead, Captain Jiwoo's calm voice filled the bridge. It was the same human woman who had sat across from him at that negotiation table months ago, the one he had dismissed as primitive and weak. "Admiral Heijin, this is Captain Jiwoo. Are you receiving me clearly?" "I hear you, Captain," he replied, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded. "Good. I want to make you an offer." Admiral Heijin almost laughed. An offer? His fleet was destroyed. His ships were scattered across a dozen star systems, and the Confederation's military power was broken. What kind of offer could she possibly make to him? "We didn't start this war to conquer anyone," Captain Jiwoo continued. "We started it because someone tried to force us into slavery. All we ever wanted was to be left alone to live our lives in peace." The Admiral listened, confused. This wasn't how victorious enemies usually talked. "Here's what we're willing to do. End the exploitation of all species under Confederation rule. Establish fair trade practices that benefit everyone, not just the powerful. Give every species the right to govern themselves. Do these things and this war ends today." Admiral Heijin stared at his communications console. "You're offering us peace terms?" "I'm offering you a chance to build something better than what existed before," Captain Jiwoo replied. "We could destroy what's left of your fleet. We could hunt down every Confederation ship in the galaxy. We could turn your worlds into smoking ruins. But what would that accomplish? More suffering, more death, more hatred. You have us completely defeated," Admiral Heijin said slowly. "Why would you show us mercy?" "Because mercy is what separates civilized people from animals," came the simple reply. "Because someone has to break the cycle of violence and revenge. And because we believe that even former enemies can become friends given the chance." As Admiral Heijin sat in stunned silence, similar conversations were happening across the galaxy. Human commanders were offering surrender terms that seemed too generous to believe. Captured Confederation officers were being treated well and offered safe passage home. Damaged enemy ships were receiving repair assistance from the same humans who had been trying to destroy them hours earlier. 2 weeks later, Ambassador Kyung-min found himself in a place he never thought he would be again, standing before the emergency session of the Confederation High Council. But everything had changed. The great meeting hall on the Confederation's capital world felt smaller somehow, less impressive than it had before. The assembled representatives looked at him with a mixture of fear, anger, and confusion. These were beings who had ruled the galaxy for centuries, who had never imagined that their power could be broken by a species they considered primitive. "Tell us exactly what happened out there," demanded Council Leader Voss Prime, her tentacles writhing, with barely controlled rage. "How did a handful of human mining ships destroy our entire military?" Ambassador Kyung-min took a deep breath. For months he had tried to understand it himself. The humans had been outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Their ships were crude collections of spare parts. Their technology was centuries behind Confederation standards. By every logical measure, they should have been crushed within days. "They could have destroyed us completely," he began, his voice hollow with shock. "Not just defeated us, actually wiped the Confederation out of existence. They had us outmaneuvered, outfought, and outthought at every turn. Our strategies were useless against them. Our superior numbers meant nothing. Our advanced technology couldn't match their determination." "But they're primitives," Council Leader Voss Prime insisted. "How is this possible?" "That's what I thought too," Kyung-min replied. "I spent my entire career managing what I called lesser species. I believed that age meant wisdom, that technology meant strength, that having ruled for centuries meant we knew how to rule forever." He paused, looking at each member of the council in turn. "I was completely wrong. There is nothing lesser about humanity. When we cornered them, they fought like demons. When they planned their counterattack, they thought like the greatest strategic minds in galactic history. But when they achieved total victory, they showed mercy like saints." The council chamber fell silent. These were words that no one had ever expected to hear. "They offered us peace," Kyung-min continued. "Not the peace of the conquered accepting whatever terms the victor chooses to give. Real peace, fair trade, equal treatment, an end to the exploitation that we had practiced for so long that we forgot it was exploitation." "And if we refuse?" asked Council Member Horth 7. Then they'll probably leave us alone anyway, Kyung-min said quietly. That's what makes them truly terrifying. They're not interested in ruling us. They just want to be free, and they want everyone else to be free too. They're offering us a chance to join a better galaxy, not threatening to destroy us if we don't. Council Leader Vos Prime's tentacles stopped writhing. What are you recommending, Ambassador? I'm recommending that we accept their terms immediately, Kyung-min replied without hesitation. Not because we're afraid of them, though we should be. Not because we're beaten, though we are. But because they're offering us something we never had before, a chance to be part of something better than an empire built on fear and exploitation. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but every being in the chamber heard him clearly. We will never anger the humans again. Not because they'll destroy us if we do, but because we finally understand what we should have learned long ago. True strength isn't the ability to force others to obey you. True strength is the ability to protect those who can't protect themselves. True strength is choosing mercy when you could choose revenge. In the months that followed, the galaxy watched. Something unprecedented happened. The humans didn't establish their own empire to replace the Confederation. Instead, they helped rebuild what the war had destroyed. Former Confederation officers found themselves working alongside human engineers to design fair trade agreements. Species that had been enslaved for generations were given ships and technology to start their own civilizations. The crude human vessels that had seemed so primitive became the most welcome sight in the galaxy. When they appeared in a star system, it meant freedom for the oppressed, fair trade for the merchants, and protection for the weak. The species that had seemed so young and primitive had taught the galaxy's oldest civilizations the most important lesson of all, what it truly meant to be strong.